It's Thursday, May 15th, 2025. The Trump Middle East tour continues on. RFK Jr. spits fire, and one congressman can't name the cities he represents. Next on the AM Update.
Anybody thinks that we did gold standard medicine in this country from these institutions, look at our children. They're the sickest children in the world.
What are the 5 gross points cities?
Well, look, I'm not here to answer a quiz.
Is there any belief he holds which survives a week in Downing Street?
Yes, the belief that she talks rubbish.
We can't be ourselves in the Episcopal Church and take the step of resettling white Afrikaners from South Africa.
We're extremely honored to have you here. We're very excited, very happy. It's a historic visit. And I don't know if you know that you are the first American president to officially to visit Qatar, right? So
that is the voice of Qatar Emir Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, who welcomed President Trump to the tiny nation in the Middle East yesterday. Trump continuing on from Saudi Arabia to Qatar. Today he'll be in the United Arab Emirates. He announced a number of deals with the Qatari government, including about $1.2 trillion. This is what the White House is saying. $1.2 trillion in economic commitments from Qatar, including $96 billion in a Boeing aircraft mega order. That's the largest domestic order of airplanes from that company in Boeing's history. Now, when it comes to Saudi Arabia, I think that country has changed a lot over the last 25 years. I think for the better, but I'm not totally sure. When it comes to Qatar, $1.2 trillion of investment sounds like a good thing, but boy howdy, I do not trust that government as far as I can throw them. But with both Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and of course you heard those announcements of an easing of sanctions against Syria, we're just trying something new in the Middle East, a non-dogmatic foreign policy. You know, Trump's speech in Riyadh this week very much sounded like his first speech 7-8 years ago, I should say, in Riyadh, which is basically, let's make a bunch of money together, and if anybody gets in our way and tries to cause problem for life and limb or treasure in terms of the United States, well, they are going to get a Moab dropped on them. That's basically the least dogmatic foreign policy that the United States has had when it comes to that area of the world. Back at home, speaking of dogma, this is the founder of Ben and Jerry's, Ben Cohen,
while the committee conducts its business,
who got tossed out, physically tossed out of an RFK Jr. hearing yesterday. RFK Jr. testifying about HHS's work there, and he spit some fire back at some hostile questions, particularly when it comes to what he's been able to accomplish so far.
38% of our youth now are diabetic or pre-diabetic. That was 0 when I was a kid. Anybody thinks that we did gold standard medicine in this country from these institutions, look at our children. They're the sickest children in the world. Laura, you say that excuse me, Congressman DeLauro, you say that you've worked for 20 years on getting food dye out. Give me credit. I got it out in 100 days.
I'll give you that credit.
All right, so let's work together and do something that we all believe in, which is have healthy kids in our country, for God's sake.
I know there's been some disappointment with HHS and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., particularly when it comes to the COVID jabs. But it's stuff like that I voted for. That's what I voted for. Just write to these really do-nothing politicians. Just saying, what have you been doing for your entire career in Washington, D.C.? I did what you're trying to do, Representative DeLauro. I did what you've been trying to do for 20 years. I did that in less than 100 days. RFK Jr. continued on when it comes to supposed cuts to Medicaid. He also dished it out for another congressman.
So do you disagree with the cuts that are being proposed for Medicaid right now?
Oh, the cuts to, this is I don't know if you understand this or whether you're just mouthing, the Democratic talking points. The cuts to Medicaid are for fraud, waste, and abuse. And I'll tell you what that means. It means that because of DOGE, we were able to determine, and it's about 8 million people who would be affected. Because of DOGE, we were able to determine that there are 1 million people who are claiming Medicaid from multiple states. That's illegal. It's theft. You're not allowed to do that. There are another 1 million people who are collecting both under Obamacare and
Mr. Secretary, that has nothing to do with the budget that's
these are
actually
the only
being
cuts that are
proposed
being
in the
made.
House.
These are the only cuts that are being made to Medicaid.
That's not true.
Yes, it is.
Somebody's lying there. Somebody's lying there. It's either RFK Jr. or that congressman. I believe his name is Mr. Harder. Not sure where he's from. Never heard of him. But somebody's lying there. Either the cuts that are being proposed in the reconciliation bill are just to get rid of the fraud in Medicare, or they actually are real cuts. There's no blending of this that can be true. And both of those individuals seemed genuinely convinced that they were telling the truth. I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt once again to RFK Jr. Another Democrat congressman, this would be Sri Thanadar, who I believe comes from India, but he's a congressman from Michigan. He wasn't the only Michigan congressperson that was making headlines the other day. What's-her-face Congresswoman Dingleberry fell asleep during a hearing yesterday. Well, Sri Thanadar is wanting or trying to file articles of impeachment against President Trump, and he's pissing off a lot of his own Democrat members for making them take a vote on this. He was interviewed recently by a Michigan independent journalist, and he was asked a few gotcha questions. Look up, they shouldn't be gotcha questions. They're about his own district.
I don't know.
What are the 5 Gross Points cities?
Well, look, I'm not here to answer a quiz. I'm here to say that I'm going to fight for the people of Detroit. I'm going to fight for my
Grosse
constituents
Pointe
and all of the Grosse Points and all of Taylor and every part of the 13th district.
Let me just do this real quick. Grosse Pointe Park, Grosse Pointe Woods, Grosse Pointe Farms, and Grosse Pointe Shores. Okay.
That's right.
You know, on your campaign filings, it says occupation. Yours says United States government. Aren't you employed by the people of the United States?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, you fix that one. Okay, and finally, you're getting nailed with this one. The beagles. You abandoned the beagles, left them to die in their cages at your pharmaceutical
I love animals. You look,
oh, man. I like that guy. Don't know who that is, the questioner there. He just treats his own congressman as his employee, because that's what it actually is. Now, I don't live in Michigan or anywhere near Detroit. I'm guessing the question about the Grosse Pointe cities, I'm guessing that's something that somebody in Detroit should know. A congressman from Detroit should know. But I don't know. If we've got any Michigan listeners, I assume that's kind of common knowledge what those 5 cities of Grosse Pointe are. I don't know. But I just think, like, if you're representing that area, you should probably know that question. Look, Keir Starmer, UK Prime Minister, he's on the warpath against legal immigration this week. He's on the warpath. He posted on X yesterday. He said he's deported 24,000 people who have no right to be in the UK, and he said he's not going to stop there. He was getting hammered by Parliament, by this member of Parliament yesterday, and he had a nice little clapback.
Prime Minister once spoke of compassion and dignity for migrants and for defending free movement. Now he talks of islands of strangers and taking back control. Somebody here has to call this out, Mr. Speaker. It seems the only principle he consistently defends is whichever he last heard in a focus group. So I ask him, is there any belief he holds which survives a week in Downing Street?
Yes, the belief that she talks rubbish.
Oh, snap. Of course, what he's targeting are individuals like this. This is a report from Patrick Christie's at GBN. That would be GBN. That's an independent broadcasting outfit in the United Kingdom. This is a part of a report that he did from the, let's call it the Hotel Calais in Calais, France. That's a port city, or a coastal city, I should say, just right on the English Channel. He interviewed an individual from Africa, holed up there trying to get into the UK. And there's a lot of mixed emotions that I have about this clip. Listen to this.
Why should English people pay for you to have a house?
Maybe they give me house, they give me anything I can need, they give me.
Just give it?
Yeah.
Why?
Because people in England is perfect.
Oh, so you think we're all rich? people.
Yeah.
So we can give, okay. Can I tell you something?
Okay.
We are not all rich people. If I said to you, look, we don't have enough houses in England, would that stop you coming to England?
Okay. Maybe I come back in my country and I change in another country after.
Yeah, maybe you try another country.
Yeah.
If you think
So there's an interview with an illegal alien held up in Calais, France, trying to get into Great Britain, trying to be transferred in legally, illegally, some way. Man, aside from the fact that that's just incensing, that there are people on this planet that just think it's somebody else's job to give them everything. They have no frame of reference for civilization whatsoever, other than give me, give me, give me. This is an actual quote from that would-be illegal alien. Give me house, give me anything I need, give me. That's the quote. Aside from that just being incensed. On another level, feel sorry for that dude. Now, I want to make it clear, he is not a victim here. Absolutely not. Just because he's ignorant does not mean that he's a victim. But I kind of feel sorry for him because he has been sold an absolutely bass-ackwards view of the world, a false bill of goods as far as how the world works. He's worse off for it. Wherever he comes from is worse for it. And yet Western elites, for the better part of the last generation plus, have perpetuated, aided, abetted, and encouraged this belief amongst the third worlders that they can just come to the West and they'll be given absolutely everything. When we come back, the Episcopal Church is on brand this week, and we hear from the Canadian apologist Wesley Huff. He joined Andrew Schultz's podcast with an amazing presentation of the gospel. That's coming up next.
We can't be ourselves in the Episcopal Church and take the step of resettling white Afrikaners from South Africa. Our church has a long commitment to racial justice and reconciliation, and we have historic ties with the Anglican Church of South Africa. Desmond Tutu is a part of been a partner in this work for us. So we're just not able to take this step. It's not in line with anything that we're about.
That is Episcopal Church Bishop Sean Rowe explaining why his denomination will not take white Afrikaners from South Africa. That's just 100%, 200 proof racism right there. Now, it just so happens to be aimed in the direction of these white Afrikaners from South Africa. They're no stranger to that, given where they come from. But that is so on brand for the Episcopal Church, announcing this week, not only will they not help resettle these South African refugees, they're also completely disbanding their refugee resettlement program with the federal government. And now here's this. You'll recall Wesley Huff. He's the Canadian apologist who joined Joe Rogan and got into some extremely good and solid and productive conversations about theology and Christian apologetics. He shared the gospel maybe on the biggest platform it's ever been shared on, at least in the modern age. Well, he joined another popular podcast. This would be comedian Andrew Schultz's podcast, and had much the same discussion. Again, this is apologist Wesley Huff sharing the gospel on a large platform.
Christianity is the fittest stepping down and sacrificing himself for the survival of the weakest. And that changes things in that mercy and justice are not pitted against each other. It's not justice at the expense of mercy. It's not mercy at the expense of justice. They're actually accomplished together in the act of the cross, where the self-volunteering of Jesus going to the cross, right? He says, no one takes my life from me. I give it of my own accord.
This is why forgiveness is an accomplishable goal, even for the most heinous act, because God has already taken on the punishment for that heinous act that person committed.
Well, forgiveness is costly, right? Like there's always a cost to forgiveness somewhere. And so
I'm just saying in general, that perceived lack of justice doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Yes, this person killed somebody. Yeah, Jesus died on the cross for that very thing that person did. Yeah. It's not this person killed somebody. All right, how are we going to reconcile this? Do we give him 20 lashes? What is the thing for this act?
Right.
And who gets to decide that? It's already been decided. Right. So now we can go forgive.
It's not a points-based system either, which also gets hairy with like, so Islam is this concept within the Quran of the scales.
Okay.
Right? So you do bad things, you just try to outweigh them with your good things. There's a weird subjectivity to that.
Right, because who decides,
And the actually Isaiah says that our righteous acts are like filthy rags. And the term there, it's debated, but could actually mean something like menstrual rags. Like they're like, they're not just dirty and gross, and it's like ritually impure with stuff you don't want to get near. And so it's like, look, God, look at all the good things I'm doing. And he's like, you don't understand compared to my holiness how like far that measures up. And so once again, God doesn't need to do any of this. God doesn't need to create. God doesn't need to forgive. God doesn't need to give mercy or justice. But the fact that he does, and then calls us all into that, to turn away. So the word repentance in Greek, metanoite, actually means to change one's mind and actions and attitudes. Like it's less of a, just don't do it anymore. It's more of like metanoia, change your brain. Like change it entirely. Your thought patterns start. It's what I talked about before with the 10 Commandments. Like you're seeing it as a command, and God is saying, no, it's a promise. You don't need to steal. You don't need to murder. You don't need to lie. You don't need to. Those are promises that God makes to you because of who you are through what he can do.
And then if you don't change, you said you either become Adam or you become Christ, right?
Well, yeah. So it's like when you stand before the judgment throne, you're either going to take the penalty you deserve, or you're going to be covered in the righteousness of Christ, and that penalty is on him.
That is apologist Wesley Huff on the Andrew Schultz podcast, getting into some really meaty theology, some really deep theology and apologetics there. And again, this is a massive platform, and you've got a captive audience. You can tell each of the guys on the cast of that podcast are very interested in what Wesley Huff has to say. What's interesting about Wesley, too, is that he appears to be like a bodybuilder. In fact, I think he is. I think that's maybe how he and Joe Rogan kind of got to know each other or got connected. So he's got kind of the bodybuilder physique, and yet he's got the communication and theological precision of somebody like R.C. Sproul or John MacArthur. Really interesting stuff. And it's been interesting. I had no idea who he was, and he's blown up. I pray that the celebrity kind of influencer or Christian celebrity influencer culture does not get to him. It does not seem like it is. But I pray that he continues to use these opportunities on these massive platforms to do what he just did there. And finally, our poll of the week, I asked you, is the U.S. winning the tariff war? I gave you 4 options. Here are the results. In 4th place, the option of Orange Man Bad. 4th place at 2.5%. 3rd place, of course not, is at 4.2%. In 2nd place, it's complicated. Comment below. That was at 19.2%. And yes, obviously, we're winning the tariff war. That was number 1 at 74.1%. Let's go to this. China Compass says, I think we agreed to meet just a little too soon. Not sure why things couldn't have played out at least long enough for one fully tariffed ship to cross the Pacific. I think I kind of understand that. And this sounds counterintuitive, but if this were hurting the United States more than it was China, then time is on China's side. They see the world as unfolding in 100-year cycles. We see it as unfolding in 2 or 4 or 6-year cycles, political cycles. So, if anything, it would have been, if this was going to draw on at all, it would have been because I think they saw themselves in an advantageous position. Now, I don't think that actually is true. I don't think it's true for the reasons that I laid out earlier this week. If you're China and you see this as a self-imposed wound against your just foremost geopolitical foe or competition, let's call it that, then you just let them, don't let your opponent, don't try to intervene when your opponent is shooting themselves in the foot. But they didn't do that. They agreed to meet and talk. Now, why, if you're the United States, why wouldn't you just let this play out? If you do believe you have the upper hand, well, it's because we operate in 2, 4, 6-year political cycles. So if they're ready to meet, let's get this thing going. Let's see if we can strike a deal or give a 90-day pause while we strike out a more comprehensive deal. So I get what you're saying, China Compass, But I think if you're the Trump administration, you're looking for results. That's something that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has talked about. Auburn Tiger says, yes, cautiously optimistic. Don't drone me, bro. I would say that it's too early to tell. We don't really know the full details of the agreement that were made, and the talks with China are still in the early stages. I'm hopeful that things are better for Americans and American workers at the end of the day, but the average American didn't have to get out of their comfort zone since Liberation Day. I don't like Trump saying how we're going to bring in all this money from the tariffs, because it simply isn't true relative to our national debt and deficits. However, it can be used to disrupt the status quo and level the playing field for some American workers. Then LFG. That's a good take, and I think it strikes a balance between let's pump the brakes on long-term tariffs here, because you're absolutely right. I just don't see a way you can have relatively high tariffs on most of the world and have an income tax. I don't think your citizens can survive that long-term. I just don't think that can happen. However, if they are just still being used as a bargaining chip, and in the case of China specifically, maybe long-term tariffs, relatively high tariffs can work to bring about the rebalancing that Scott Bessent talked about yesterday. More of a consumer-based economy for China, more of a production-based economy for the United States. Some sort of a rebalancing there. I think that can work because Council of Economic Advisors Chairman Stephen Mirren has made the case that the incidence of tariffs actually falls on China because of how vastly over-leveraged towards the American market they are. So I'm willing to give long-term tariffs a chance with China, but not as a rule for the rest of the world, which kind of raised my eyebrows a little bit with the UK deal, because they were touting a 10% permanent tariff on the UK. KM says, I think less than 1% of Americans, myself included, fully understand the dynamics of international trade policy. Difficult to really have a grip on it. Hope Team Orange Man are doing a good job. Okay, I appreciate the self-awareness, and I'm trying to have some self-awareness myself. I've studied this a lot since Liberation Day, and I feel like I'm still in the 99% that you talk about there. I feel like I know a lot more now than I did a month ago, but I feel like I've only scratched the surface. My fear is on this and other platforms that because of my interest in this topic and my fascination by it, and most people don't understand it or not interested in it, my fear is that by highlighting it so often and so frequently, that people are bored by it, because I think you might be right that 99% don't really understand or care. But I understand. I see what you're saying. Caravan DLM says, I'm not informed enough on the issue, so I avoid giving my takes. Okay. Kind of the same vein as KM. The Forester said, short term, yes, Trump will open up some markets that the United States isn't used to entering, but long term, once the Democrats or weak-kneed Republicans, once the next Democrat or weak-kneed Republican gets into the Oval Office, the deals will go back to the status quo, which will in turn be a shock to the U.S. market. Yeah, I'm not sure about that, Forrester. I mean, that would be, if these things are successful and tangibly successful, like the GDP picks up, we're exporting more, not just our treasury bills. We're actually exporting and producing more, and there are more manufacturing jobs and good paying jobs. It would be incredibly politically unpopular to then go back to the status quo from before Trump. I understand your skepticism and maybe cynicism a little bit on some level. Jim Heron said it would be pretty cool if we had any idea. I guess he'll do what he does, and we'll have to see if it works. Erica says, I picked Orange Man bad because that means I don't have to think and compare to everyone else. That's how it works. Regular Dirk says, if you take the perspective of Trump's narrative, we're just now beginning to hold ground in a war we have been losing for decades. See, that's the premise that you need to start from. I mean, I think that's obvious, and I think it's what's missing from the premise of most people who are just opposed to these policies. What are you prepared to do to actually deal with the China problem? What are you prepared to do about it? Because it is a problem. And if you don't agree that it's a problem, I don't know what planet you're living on. Romans 3:23 says, I think you should have added one more option. Yes, but not in a landslide, so a win is a win and we'll take it. Revival says, yes, we're winning and we're just getting started. That's going to do it for a Thursday. Back at it tomorrow with another Ask or Tell Me Anything. Make your submissions. Ask me any question you want. Tell me any news story you think needs covered on the AM Update. Ask or Tell Me Anything. That's tomorrow. Look for the pinned post on X at Real AM Update. Have a wonderful Thursday. Back at it again tomorrow.
I'm Ben McIntyre. This is the AM Update.